Agora. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Eu adoro esse sininho. Eu adoro esse sininho. Well, good afternoon, everybody. We'll start our roundtable, intersectional alliances and the fallacious critique of identitarianism. Let me introduce my colleagues. Sergio Costa, sociologist from FU Berlin. Nitzan Shoshan, del Colegio de México, anthropologist. And Bianca Santana, journalist from the Casa Sueli Carneiro. We decide that Nitzan will start. It's a conversation, a talk, about 10, 15 minutes, and then Bianca, and so Sergio, okay? And then we open to the our large talk. Okay. Nitzan, please.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for the organizers for inviting me here. I'm going to talk in English. I see that that's okay. So I was asked to provide some comments for opening a conversation, and that's what I'm going to do. And about identity politics and identitarianism and the critique of that. So I think before that, I want to say maybe a cautionary word. I'm not going to be here defending to the death the politics of identity, because I think that there is a lot of stuff that goes by that name today that should be criticized. And I think we need to be very, very careful when we look at what is often named identity politics and see what are we talking about. There's a lot of appropriation. For me, the title of this panel immediately brings to mind the identitarian movement in Europe, rather than the sort of anti-racist activism of Brazil. Some of you probably know all about it, certainly the Germans among you. But these are groups of young people, see themselves as culturally indigenous to Europe and at risk of cultural annihilation. And they demand not only recognition of their cultural uniqueness and their cultural rights, but also policies that will protect their culture, their cultural identity from perceived threats, such as migration, of course. So these are very charged terms and charged words, and ones that we want to be cautious with. And this is a very organized, a very well educated, relatively well educated, disciplined, articulate movement, comparatively very difficult to study compared with other far right movements. They're very smart and they know what to say and who to talk to. And they build on pre-existing regionalist and nationalist cultural particularisms, while appealing to also and recruiting members and activists across boundaries. So it's a transnational particularist movement across putative cultural frontiers, so that they highlight cultural rather than putatively biological or racial identities. Just to give a sense of some of the uses of some of the things that we can see happening in that field, and we shouldn't confuse with other types of politics. We can also think, and I do think, about trans-exclusive feminism that uses the identity of women to exclude activists from certain forms of politics. The category of woman as a mechanism of exclusion that implies a certain essential identity that in the last instance seems to be reducible to biology. I'm also, these themes bring to mind, to me, Mexican students. I teach in Mexico and who go to the United States. And because of a class structure that maybe is not that different from Brazil in some senses, Mexican higher education tends to be elite and tends to be more white. And these students who come from elite families and have seen themselves as white the whole time come to American universities and are recruited into associations of students of color, or at least they're invited, and some of them are really astounded by this invitation. Why are we are not of color, you know? And so all these, you know, there's a lot of flow of these sort of uses, and it brings to mind, to me too, in a contemporary fashion, the case of Jewish people today in Germany, some of whom are complicit in the suppression of criticism of genocide, but all of whom are serving today in Germany at the hand of this and the previous German government for suppressing protests and repressing other minorities that live in Germany today. And it's in their name that we now read that Germany deports EU citizens who protest genocide, and that ideas circulated about revoking citizenship of naturalized Germans who protested genocide and ethnic cleansing. So I just, you know, I like to be careful with what we do and say and be very specific, as I'm sure we'll do here today. But of course, at the same time, nativist nationalism, which really is sort of what I study. I work with the bad guys. And we're going to have the good guys here later, so don't worry. Just hold on, hold on. We'll get there. No? Okay, all right, all right. Okay, sorry. We're not going to get any. Nativist nationalists or nationalism claim they claim essentialized identities, which can be white, which can be Hindu, which can be Hungarian, which can be Jewish. We can look around the world today and see the use of identity for promoting nativist projects. And they call for a struggle for the defense of these identity. But of course, they also come out against, not just for the protection of their own perceived cultural identities, but also against progressive identity-based discourses and politics. So this to me is not that interesting because, of course, they do that, right? First, because much of the nativist nationalist right today, as I already mentioned, is heavily invested in a politics of what's called ethno-pluralist politics, right? The new right, this idea that every group has its own culture that deserves to be preserved and defended, and that's basically the dominant line of the new right today in Europe. So they very much construct parallels between themselves and, say, indigenous people in Latin America, right? That's sort of the basis for a lot of their politics, and it has a whole history in Europe that I'm not going to go into now. And they use that for ultimately exclusionary projects. To some extent, we can trace that all the way back to the rise of Romanticism in Europe and particularly in Germany, these ideas of identity. But secondly, because what's under attack, what they attack is not so much the idea of identity as a basis for political agendas, but the agendas themselves. That's what they attack, right? That's the source of the disagreement. I think more important, however, are controversies about identitarianism and the so-called left. We can argue, I'm just going to leave it there, where many view them as particularistic and as divisive for politics today, and therefore standing in the way of some truly universal project of emancipation, as failing to appeal to publics that are broad enough to make a difference. And most often, really, either explicitly or implicitly, they're imputed to debilitate class-based politics in particular. This is a dangerous path. This is one that has not sufficiently reflected upon the failures and the exclusions, racial, ethnic, sexual, gendered, and others of the 20th century left, and that similarly fails to acknowledge how the plights of specific identifications have in fact been able to mobilize solidarity across the board. And the example of Black Lives Matters is one recent such a very spectacular example of an extremely diverse movement mobilizing around an oppressed group. To me, this is a critique that voices a lingering nostalgia for a type of progressive politics that's dominated by a certain Marxist or Marxist sympathetic view. And I say this as someone not at all opposed to Marxist or Marxist associated views. But that a view that is imagined as antagonistic to identity politics. And we can continue discussing this further today, but I just want to note that for me, and I did my academic work in the US, so even though that's not my field, I had to read a lot of American Black thinkers and Black feminists, and it's been difficult for me to find those among them who view their oppression as somehow separate from capitalist exploitation. Indeed, if anything, it's there today that there's an active and original and contemporary Marxist thought. So I see really these accusations as non-reflective about what's happening, and I think it's important to think what's behind them and where they come from. I think that the sort of the leading thinkers and often leading the political leaders of, and I'd be very interested to hear about Brazil, what's happening here, because I know less about it, but of United States blacks of blacks in the United States are very committed to, or have been very committed to, anti-capitalist struggles. So why are we getting these critiques? Where are they coming from? They don't seem to correspond to what's actually happening often, right? And I think those are some of the questions that might be interesting to explore in the discussion today. I'll finish here because I was asked to sit 10 minutes and leave time for discussion.
Oh, sorry, I thought we have 15 minutes, but I will try to do this in 10 minutes. Sorry. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to take part in this panel, despite the topic. Who can still bear being called identitarian? There's something perverse in having to respond to a pejorative label that does not aim to contribute to public debate or challenge ideas, but to disqualify people, research, and groups. Even though I'm happy to be here, and I know I will learn a lot from this conversation. In my view, this debate is about power, about who gets to produce knowledge, who gets to act politically, about what can be said. And for those in positions of power, conservatives or our progressist esquerdomachos, staying in power seems to be what matters most. Those who accuse us of being identitarian seem to be saying, go back to our place of invisibility or subordination. The good news is we are not going back. We will continue to denounce the fragility of our democracy, which does not guarantee rights to Black people, not even the right to live. A country that kills trans people more than any other, that excludes women from political participation, that fails to demarcate indigenous lands, that hides behind excellent legal texts that are never enforced. And we will fight the necessary fights without forgetting to dance, please. Out of respect for Mecila, for Sergio and Tomás, who gave me this honorable invitation, for you that are here today, and for Casa Sueli Carneiro, I will address a dishonesty term with honesty and take as serious as I can something that I don't believe is serious. What do those who call us identitarian accuse us of? One, of dividing. To our accusers, we are the ones dividing the country, dividing the left. Instead of aligning ourselves with white, male, heteronormative leadership that might one day lead to equality and justice, we demand more egalitarian practices now. The other, that Sueli Carneiro and so many other people speak of, seems to them to have been created by us, as if racism only exists because we name it, as if by naming the structures that hierarchize us, create and deepen inequalities, and kill us, we are the ones who are building those structures. As if our silence about what actually divides us and separates us were the guarantee of unity. If I didn't know this is a fallacious argument used to silence us, I might think it was a childish reaction, like a baby who believes the ball ceases to exist because it's hidden under the couch. Do I really need to say that we don't create divisions? We name the ones that already exist. Two, they also accuse us of playing the victim. Instead of going to battle, the victims say they are victims and denounce oppression. Wouldn't it be better to be strong and keep receiving all sorts of violence without saying a word, waiting the day it will be different? A victim claiming to be a victim. Where has the word gone? Victimism. But when they cry, identitarians, identitarians, that's all fine. As long as everyone stays in the proper social place and stays silent. Three, they say we are moralists, censors, defenders of political correctness. There's another common accusation made by left-wing party leaders in Brazil, by Bolsonarists and by Trumpists, all together. They all want the freedom to express violence, reproduce stereotypes, make jokes that humiliate or disqualify, I don't know, thank you, LGBTQIA more people, plus LGBTQIA+ people, Black people, Indigenous people, women, because it's just a joke. And those who, and those with the historical power to say anything, even if it's offensive, wrong, violent, or illegal, must be allowed to keep saying anything. 4, they say we ignore more important issues. Because a Black person being killed in Brazil every 12 minutes, it's not important. Because the rise in feminicide across all classes and races, but especially among Black women, is not important. What's important is what those who've always held power say it's important. Even when they claim that economic inequalities have nothing to do with race or gender, despite data, research, and evidence showing otherwise, that in Brazil, racism structures all inequalities. Who gets to define what matters are the white owners of everything, to quote Conceição Evaristo. Surely, there are other categories and accusations against us. I'm not interested in responding to each one. The dispute is not about the label, whether we are identitarians or not. It's about the models of community, society, and state we want to build. It's a dispute of projects, a dispute of power. Where I came from, we don't want power to reproduce the existing inequalities and violence. We don't want to move from the base to the top of Brazil's social pyramid. Where I came from, we don't want a pyramid. We want all people, in our differences, to have civil, social, and political rights. We will continue to challenge the idea of a universal subject that places the white man at the center. We will fight for a universality of rights that embraces our differences, without turning those differences into inequalities. We are not asking permission or being favors from those in power, not even from those with micropower. The trash will speak, and speak calmly. Human, black people, indigenous people, LGBTQIA+ people, people with disabilities, we are not fighting over identity. We are fighting for land, dignity, the right to come and go without being harassed by police or shot by militia, land hours, misogynic men, or cops. We are not defending private interests. We want public policies to consider specific realities, so their outcome are equity, equality, universality. Demarcating quilombola and indigenous land is not identitarianism. It's about keeping forests standing and preserving community-based ways of life that are real alternatives to this increasingly supremacist neoliberalism. I like to slowly repeat the name of Coalizão Negra por Direitos, Black Coalition for Rights. It's not a coalition for the rights of black people. It's a black coalition for the rights of everyone. We want to include people in this basket of universality and humanity from which we are constantly being pushed out. And let me repeat Lélia Gonzalez' words. The trash will speak. E numa boa.
So you see in which difficult situation I am for actually, contribute with something meaningful after this really two very interesting talks. And I think what I prepared has many also intersections with we both have just mentioned. So therefore, I will just go through the presentation without, I have also a text, but I decided for not reading the text for reasons of people after lunch having perhaps it is delicious food and good eye sleep. So therefore, starting with what I will say, the construction of the critique of identitarianism, always in quotation marks. So it's not my words, identitarianism is always phrased in the public debate. I think this presentation is perhaps very much based on current Brazilian debates, but I don't ignore the risks Nitzan very well mentioned in his presentation. So starting with this quotation from Richard Rorty. I don't know if it's quite no, but it's you have look at the year in which it's published, 1998, and in this book, Richard Rorty said, look, if the left ignores people on the non-suburban areas, because the suburban areas are the rich areas, at the end, a strong man can appear and present itself or himself as the, let's say, defender of the poor. So when Trump was elected 2016 for the first time, some colleagues saw in this announcement of Richard Rorty a sort of prediction of Trump's election. Our other colleague who also very early in 2000 also dealt with this question of identity politics was Nancy Fraser. And as you probably know, in this famous book published 2003 with Axel Honneth, she very much, let's say, defends the idea of two spheres of justice: the sphere of recognition, the sphere of redistribution. But I think the argument is wrong, because you don't have two spheres of justice. You have one sphere of justice, and I think Bianca's talk shows this very well. So identity, the so-called identity politics, is a form of expressing struggles for equality or inequality. You come to be more precise on this. In the Brazilian discussion, as is proper for this sort of very timely topic, academic and political discussions are completely merged. So you cannot say this is a political argument, this is academic argument. And I think this is healthy, that's like this. And just to mention a campaign which was extremely powerful, the campaign for the nomination of a female black judge. For the first time in 130 years of the Brazilian Supreme Court, and Lula had the power to actually decide to have a black woman in the court. But as you know, he decided for having first his lawyer and then his Minister of Justice, just to mention this. But this campaign was really a powerful campaign. Bianca was one of these very important protagonists of this campaign. And I think we can perhaps discuss this more, because this was for me a campaign in which, let's say, the myth of identitarianism was deconstructed in a way that is really very powerful. But let's go to my arguments against the so-called critique of identitarianism. In order to give us a sort of chic appearance, I structured the arguments in four types of argument, but the arguments, I believe you know all four arguments, but you know. And then the first argument will be the epistemological argument, the second will be the theoretical argument, the third will be the analytical argument, and the fourth will be the political argument. But they are perhaps old and no arguments for you. So starting, and Bianca mentioned this also, starting with Donna Haraway, the very famous text on knowledge. Knowledge are situated in embodied knowledge. So there is no place in the social topography in which you can produce universalist knowledge. Universalist knowledge is knowledge able to present itself as universalist because of the amount of power connected to this lugar de fala, to this site of enunciation. And I think you can transpose this completely without much mediation to politics. What are universalist arguments in politics, also in leftist politics, are arguments articulated by the most powerful actors in the field of leftist politics. Is that nothing to do with arguments which is perhaps better articulated or which are, let's say, more universal. In that sense, that is not a particularist argument. The universalist arguments are those who come from actors who have the power to say, we are actually define what is universalism and what is particularism or what is identitarianism. So therefore, this discussion, non-class arguments are not universalist. It's just a matter of power. It has nothing to do with the quality of or the transformation potential of struggles conducted by gender, race, or other kind of issues. So the second argument, the theoretical argument, is very much connected to recent discussions on intersectionality. And let's say, to mention the title of this workshop, I would refer in this case to a relational intersectionality approach, as for instance developed by Floya Antias, who studies migration in Europe, or Mara Viveiros Vigoya, who is a Colombian anthropologist working also with race, gender, and class. For this kind of approach, intersectionality is not an intersection of variables in terms of class, gender, race, etc. Intersectionality is actually a relation of relations. Since class, race, gender are relations, intersectionality is a relation of these different relational issues. So therefore, this has nothing to do with the mere, let's say, crossing variables. It's much more than that. So therefore, it's, again, to the also epistemological point, there is no non-intersectional site of enunciation in the social topography. Each site of enunciation is a site of enunciation which automatically cross these different axes of race, class, gender. So there is no a pure class argument or a pure gender argument or a pure racial argument. Each argument is, in quotation marks, contaminated by all forms of oppression. So therefore, to elect class as a sort of privileged place in which universalism is articulated is misleading, because there is no possible separation of this issue. And then just to mention again the argument of Nancy Fraser, this is also for me the reason why you don't have a sphere of recognition and a sphere of redistribution, because sites of enunciation are both. They are culturally, but they are also socially, in terms of social structure, defined. So therefore, if let's say an indigenous woman goes to the streets to actually articulate claims for protecting her ancestral knowledge, let's say the way she's articulating this claim is, so to say, identitarian, is based on identity. But of course, the claim, Bianca said this, Nitzan also says this, the claim is a claim of redistribution. It's impossible to separate, even analytically, even, let's say, theoretically, the idea of recognition and the idea of redistribution. They are exactly, let's say, the same side, the sides, or two sides of the same coin. So the third argument is a more Marxist argument, the analytical argument. And if you look at the Marxist feminists, also defenders of commons, researchers of finance and digital capitalism, just to take very different fields, all of them are saying capital accumulation takes place not only in the sphere of production, in which classes are articulated. Capital accumulation takes place everywhere in society, meaning that not only class articulates the forms of capital reproduction and accumulation, they are always, let's say, surpassed, is that this word in English? Surpassed by class, gender, and other issues. So there is no a privileged space in society where say only class relations matter in this space. So therefore, we can complete this with a sort of colonial touch, decolonial touch, and this saying, if you read, I don't know, starting with Aníbal Quijano, showing that coloniality in capitalism is not class coloniality. It's a coloniality involving gender, race, and also positions, global south, global north. And these are dimensions of, let's say, coloniality in capitalism, which are inseparable. You cannot take just one dimension. So therefore, this is also a message saying capitalism is in its constitution intersectional. Therefore, struggles against class, race, and gender inequalities may have similar transformative potential? If they have, this is an empirical question, sometimes more, sometimes less, but you cannot decide previously, let's say pre-politically, what is more emancipatory, class issues or gender issues or racial issues. Finally, to keep the 10 minutes, 11 minutes, yeah, the real political argument. I think it's quite easy. So if we look at what, let's say, we have worldwide, we can define as leftist politics or progressive forces. These progressive forces are, in the most cases, not articulated by class issues. They are articulated by gender issues, by racial issues, they are by ethnicity issues. For instance, migrants, LGBT queer populations in a worldwide, blacks, women, and so on. They are everywhere in the world today, let's say, the vital forces behind the left, and not necessarily the workers and so on. Even the Workers' Party in Brazil exists because of these movements. If they depend only on the workers, I don't think that the Workers' Party will be in power today. So therefore, just to conclude, I'm not trying to create divisions, and I'm not saying that these other issues are more or less relevant than classes. I'm just claiming for intersectional alliances. Intersectional alliances which, let's say, search for common futures, for commonalities, but also which respect differences, which respect incommensurabilities. So there are sort of incommensurabilities between these different movements. And it's not, let's say, a matter of suppressing these differences, but dealing with these differences for creating common possible futures. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm the same page as said Marcos Nobre sooner, because I, as you, I will just listen the presentations now. I don't have the text, so I will make some few commentaries. And listen to you all. I was thinking, I don't know why we are talking about this, because you three, and also me, we don't believe in identitarianism, and we could have a beer, we could have a coffee, a wine now, because we have. Do you agree? Yeah, do you agree? Yeah, we don't, and you agree too, because we don't believe in the identitarianism, but we are talking about this. Okay, so and listen to Nitzan, for example. When you say historically the social movements, and you use it as an example, the black movements, you don't know any black movement or any black leadership of this social movement that they were anti-racist and also anti-capitalism, anti-capitalists. And this is very interesting to why we are talking about divisionism when we look to the black movements, gender movements, LGBTQI plus movements, women. So why we are talking about divisionism when this critique of identitarianism is used as a fallacious argument? I don't know, but Yes, we are talking about identitarianism here. Bianca Santana, one point of your interesting talk, you said the social movements, and especially the Black women movement, they are fighting not for identity, but they are fighting, as I agree with you, by the rights, the broader rights, the rights of modernity, I guess, the rights from the French Revolution, or the rights from the women revolution, criticizing the French Revolution 2 years uh, later, or the rights from the Haitian Revolution, uh, or the rights of the workers' revolution. We are still fighting for the rights of the 19th century revolutions, and this is not the point of the identity. Everybody does politics with identity. The white man does this since the beginning, I guess. I guess. But we are talking about identitarianism here as a critique, a fallacious critique. And Sergio, oh, okay. Uh, Listen to you, and the point when you present the epistemological argument, Dana Haraway saying that every knowledge is embodied and every knowledge is situated. So, and you say, every politics is situated and every politics is also embodied. So, as Nitzan and Bianca said, we are talking about a dispute of power. We are talking about a dispute against the subalternization of some subjects. And listen to you, I was thinking, is Sergio suggesting that the critics of the identitarianism is the alternative is something like a radical intersectionality in the politics, in the production of knowledge, in cultural changing? You know? The other side and the good side maybe of this debate against the identitarianism is radical intersectionality. I don't know. So we are talking about this fallacious thing. We are talking about this strange thing. So these are my comments, and I would like to listen to you all about this thing that doesn't exist, but it's very strong in the everyday life.
Okay. Uh, thank, thank you all. I cannot agree more with all the presentations. So let me put the question another way. This I would like to formulate this question just to be a kind of a provocative question for you all. Okay. Do we need actually defend, or do we really need to undervaluate identity so we can understand the complexity of intersectional injustices that involve so many dimensions such as class, race, sexuality, gender, and it always has to do with power relations, and it produces inequality. But I mean, can we recognize that there is something important as well when we are look to this intersectional relations, and we understand that there's something at least ambivalent in the process of subjectivation, in the possibility of a positive recognition of identities, because the idea is that, okay, identity is a problem, but it's ambivalent. I'm not saying that it's not in the dispute, we are disputing identities because identities produces exclusion as well as it produces inclusion, you know? And I'm not so sure if I'm clear, I'm making myself clear here, but just, is it necessary to undervaluate identity to think about politics? Yeah, okay, that's it. Okay.
Tita?
Thank you. Thank you, Bianca Santana. It was a pleasure to hear you. And I'm kind of saying something like Mario said, because I want to think more about what we can produce, not against all of this that I um, agree a lot, because I have always learned from, for example, Patricia Hill Collins, Audre Lorde, and they are always saying that we are different and unequal. So how can we work with these differences? They are starting from that. And I think this is almost like the same as we were discussing about cosmopolitics in some way, because we are starting from differences and from radical differences. So how can we build alliances or think about, we are not thinking about identity in another way, as identity is multiple and is ambivalent. So how can we do these alliances and work together? So I would ask for you something about, like, how can we talk about intersectional agendas? Because it was very lovely to hear you, Shoshan, that you said they are they, but also we, since we are multiple. They are attacking agendas, not identities. So how can we talk about intersectional agendas? Maybe what Sergio said could be an example. When he said about the campaign for a female black judge, it's like I could say, or also affirmative actions. But I think this is very specific for the Brazilian universities and context. So maybe you can bring some other examples from Mexico. I don't know. Thank you.
I want to begin with the the joke of Nitzan about I work with bad guys and you with. Are there bad guys and good guys, or good uses and bad uses in the same line of audience? Why? Because you talk about some ideal uses of identity, but the same people use identity to exclusion, to oppress, to big, to make a border, a wall. Indigenous people do, women do, etc., etc., etc. All nation. Well, Nitzan, I also work on nations and nationalism. From Europe, nationalism is very wrong, including Gandhi and India and the liberation in Africa and from Latin America, also there, or the imperial uses of nation. How can you establish now you cannot be nationalism or whatever, any of these identities that we are talking here? I think that situated means that in any context, the same person could be in other position of power, the same person, and the same person can make other use of the same identity.
Good afternoon. Um, my question is for Sergio, but if the others want to comment as well. I want to focus on the political side of your discussion. I'm very much in agreement with your critique of Nancy Fraser, but I would like to ask something about the specificity of identity in its political mobilization, because like you said, in public discourse it comes to mean race or gender or other disputes which are not centered around class. But actually there is something specifically uh, we could say maybe identitarian or identity based around some forms of political mobilization, and that would, for example, establish a difference between civil rights movement and Black liberation movement, meaning that identity would be a specific late 20th century form of political mobilization that, for example, Malcolm X would use, but Martin Luther King would not. So it would be a term that could establish a difference between different politics and not mean race as a whole, like the public discourse tends to do. So that's the question.
Thanks for these presentations. I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate, but I was curious about a few things, and I want to go back to something that Audre Lorde would have said, also Maria Lugones, for example, and they show quite clearly that these alliances aren't so easily developed or established or then maintained. Like she says, like Maria, for example, says very clearly that she can't be lesbian in the Nación. Like she's not accepted. Like she can be there as a Latina, but she can't be there as a lesbian Latina. And I think somehow I feel there's a really strong consensus on the table and in the room, but it feels like slightly suspicious to me because there's more than this example, right? You have homo nationalism that could be solidary with the trans movement, but they're not. They co-opted into the nation. You can say, well, that's white dudes, so I guess they're also gay, but that doesn't matter because they're white. But still, I think it's a question. You can also think of, yesterday I saw the exposition, the day before yesterday, of Sanele Muholi in the IMS, and there's some regular Africans being interviewed, or being LGBTQIA+, is not African. I didn't want to bring that example because it's easy to say, oh, these are Africans, so there's the backward continent. It's not where I want to go to, but I want to say that the African identity has a hard time for some people, especially people that are confronted with all of these identitarian politics by a right-wing nationalist sort of forms of governance, and they adopt them quite easily. So I'm curious to hear those that presented to say a little bit about this, how to build coalitions, how to maintain them, because I think it's a bit harder than it sounded like. It sounded very much like we came to a consensus of a liberal left educated class that we wanted to think that identitarian is bad, and we are all able to do alliances. So that's the playing the devil's advocate a bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm not so sure if our problem is about building alliances, but my question is, in which terms are we building alliances? Because the Brazilian Black movement is always trying to do alliances, and we still in the end of the line. I think the question is, which are the terms of an important alliance? I think, to me, it's about, in some, we are always we are all we are all will be black, or I think we need to think about the terms of which alliances we are trying to do, and which ones are important to us, or which keep us in the end of the line. To me, the question sounds like that. In the, I want to hear you about it. Thanks.
Okay. Now, I was wondering because it did not appear here, but one of the things that Nancy Fraser is going to do and is differentiate what would be like the neoliberal movements and from the other movements. So I want to hear what are your perspectives if we can make this differentiation, because I'm really into I think there is some relation when you think about Melinda Cooper, and she's talking about family values, and she says that somehow even like the left wing, we start to make these critiques in terms of, okay, the connections between people are becoming weaker, so we have this destabilization of family and other things. And she's gonna say yes, but neoliberalism is an answer to those movements that start to disestablish the power relations. So maybe this is after and not exactly before. So this inversion for me makes sense also when we're claiming about this idea of a neoliberal movements, because before you have neoliberalism, those kind of movements, they are questioning power relations, and this is super important. And I think this is somehow, especially this idea, is an answer again. We're gonna come back to the traditional values, or you're gonna say that we need to reestablish family values because these are important, and this is also a critique that comes from the left. So I would like to know what you think about the influence, and when people say that there is a difference about the neoliberal movements and others.
So one more time, no, for thinking of the very good questions. Thank you so much. I don't know if I'm able to answer our questions, at least all related to our contributions. But I just go through the questions, starting with Mario. The idea of radical intersectionality is a powerful idea. So I think it's something that we can work on, but I don't think that behind this label, you have already a sort of project. So it's something that could be a project to be constructed. Yeah, let's say the process is part of the construction. So and I don't think that you have a response to that just now. So this also connected to ego questions. So what are the terms of such alliances? This is also a political question. So therefore, my insistence on, let's say, preserving differences. So coalitions don't mean let's say, disappearing, erasing differences. The differences are there, and if these coalitions seem to, let's say, to suppress these differences, you cannot re-articulate the alliance starting from a more perhaps racial position, from a gender position, even if let's say, the whole thing is intersectional, but you have different positionalities inside it. And then you can react from different perspectives. And therefore, so this radical intersectionality could be something that could be indeed constructed in order to preserve this sort of situateness of our individual position and also a position of groups, and at the same time trying to construct something common. Yeah, especially because so we are also very powerful adversaries. We have powerful also opponents. So therefore, it's not about epistemological games. It's a political game. Mm-hmm. And to keep also the power to react and so on. Then the discussions of Julio, I think, and I think this was also your point on identity, also somehow also Alejandro's question. I think identity is first an instrument of including, but also excluding. let's say, no contrary arguments to that. But what I think is that what we should look at is not identity, is not recognition, but equality. So let's say the regulatory instrument, the regulatory parameters to observing struggles for justice should remain equality, meaning that some arguments use the idea of identity for protecting privileges. If, I don't know, the movements studied by Nitzan say, we are the real Germans, so you should have more rights than you. This is also a struggle for redistribution of privilege, so keeping our privilege. Also, if some parts, even of the Brazilian left, say this is a identitarian movement, so having a female black woman in the STF is an identitarian struggle. This is also sort of keeping the privilege of the white men. And so therefore, I think we, at least as social scientists, should look first at equality, more or less equality, more or less inequality. And identity I see as an instrument of articulating struggles for more equality or less equality, for preserving privilege or promoting more rights, but not as something that itself is something to be preserved. This is, I know, perhaps we will get into trouble with especially anthropologists, but I see the idea of identity always relational, not as ontological identity, and also embedded in power relations. And therefore, I think this is also part of our research program in Mecila. So you talk very much about differences, but not identity. So how differences and inequalities are articulated. I think this will remain for me the key for analyzing struggles for justice and not identity. But this is a very broad discussion, just to touch it very briefly. Then the point also raised by Tita. So it's not exactly your question, but just to react to it, what could be intersectional politics? I think we had in the presidential election 2022 in Brazil some spaces in which really intersectional alliances were built. I don't say that these alliances are represented in the current government. This is another thing. But in the campaign, so in the resistance against the far right, I saw moments of radical intersectionality in which the vocabulary of, politics of mutual care, which come very much from Black movement and other women movement and so on, were very present also in the vocabulary of Lula himself. Also the idea of politics of life against necropolitics. This is all sort of intersectional moments of politics, even in a presidential campaign. So therefore, this could be the sort of, let's say, labels for mobilizing, for articulating these intersectional alliances. But I see this always, let's say, from a situative perspective. So these are moments, not really alliances for the life. So it's alliances for a certain moment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the questions. I am not able to respond in them, but I will share some reflections. I think identity is necessary for me because it's a start point. I like very much when the movement of Black women say that to have this political subject, Black women, it's important to participate of the society. Because if I don't have this, I have nothing. I'm not a human being. Because people are not looking at me like a human being. So if I am a Black woman and I am with another Black woman, I can start in this point, but not for preserving this, but for being together, to try to build alliances that is really hard. This movement for a black woman, for black women in the STF, it's a case. You are right about this, Sergio, because we tried to have alliances with different groups, and it was terrible. It was very difficult. One day, I took my phone, called a powerful man with money, because he was giving lots of money for white institutions that know how to do a campaign in a right way. Because the black organizations, come on, you don't know how to do that. So come on, what are you doing? And so it's really hard to construct this radical intersectionality, because we don't trust you. And I trust Sergio. I trust Tomás. I don't trust Cebrap. And it's not only me. And it's not only me. It's my political group. It's because we have a history, we have a past, we have money, we have power in the table. So it's not that easy. So when you talk, oh, let's make alliance, I can't stay here. Okay. But I don't know what I will talk with everyone is here. And because when we are not very when we are not paying lots of attention, come on again. So you did it again. Of course, we can use identities in different ways. But when you talk about nationalism and for whom and why, I am very close to women from the Western Sahara. That's a country that Brazil don't recognize as a country. And for me, it's difficult to understand why it's so important for you to have a state. I have Brazil and they kill us all the time. So why is so important? But for them, it's really important because Morocco is there all the time killing people because they're not Moroccan. So sorry, it's hard to understand, and it's difficult to know what to do in different time, but it's not always the same. Let me see. About identitarian is something bad, and everybody in this room knows that. I hope you are right. I really hope. But of course, we have to talk about how to maintain coalitions and how to construct them. But this answer, we really have to get together, but sharing power and sharing money, or it's not possible to do that. It's not, oh, please trust me because of course we want the same. It's not true. And there's something more about the new liberal movements. Another very objective example, Coalizão Negra por Direitos and CUFA during pandemics. Both groups were making campaigns for having food and distributing food for population. But Black Coalition for Rights was doing this, denouncing Bolsonaro, asking for impeachment and articulating this with a popular organization. CUFA was doing this with Carrefour and saying it's okay, Carrefour, to kill a black man inside the supermarket. So of course it's different. And it's good to be different. Black Coalition for Rights, we have a note against CUFA. And people were, come on, you are doing this. You are dividing black movement. No, it's not the same. We are not all the same black movement.
Yes. No? Yeah. All right. So again, just some thoughts that came up. I mean, to me, it reminded this panel a lot of a meeting I had with my thesis advisor. When I asked her, I don't even remember, do you think it's this or it's that? And she told me it's both. And it's something I've applied since then. And I think usually it's both. That's usually the right answer in life. And I would say even that when we look at these sort of intersectionalities, I'm not even sure to what extent it makes sense to ask which one is more, important in a given case, because really they are fundamentally inseparable, some of these dimensions. So maybe in certain cases, but I would think that, for example, the anti-racist struggle in Brazilian universities is a class struggle, for sure. There is no way to think through it without, to separate it or to think what's more important, because the class structure in Brazil is also a racial structure, right? So I think, in a way, we need to also recognize that not only whiteness, beyond the sort of critique that it's just minorities or whatever, but not only whiteness, class itself is an identity. Class itself is very much an identification, way beyond designating a simple, objectively measurable position in the social structure. And if there isn't that identification, it's very difficult to call that class beyond, maybe in some demographic studies, but it's meaningless politically, right? So we're always talking about these dynamics, and then that leaves us with sort of two vectors of critique, one heading right and one heading left, and we're just criticizing everything. But I don't know if we want to end up in the center. The center is not necessarily where one wants to end up. So I don't have a good answer for that. I think that we need to be critical, and I think there Alejandro's comment is very well taken, that we need to be critical of uses of certain identities, regardless of sort of where they circulate. And just an example that came immediately to my mind when Alejandro, you made your comments. I think Mexican nationalism probably is the only competitor with Brazilian nationalism in Latin America. And the Mexican Constitution guarantees that beaches are public and open to all Mexicans. And, you can hear Mexicans complain about these rich Japanese who come and buy their beaches and make them inaccessible, right? But it's one or two for every 100 Mexican millionaires who buy the beaches and make them inaccessible. But nobody complains about that. If there is a problem of accessibility, and there is an unconstitutionality with beach access in Mexico, it's mostly caused by the Mexican wealthy, and not, but nobody complains about them. So it always, this nationalism, right? It's anti-imperialist, anti-USA in Mexico, etc. But there's also, we have to be watchful, even in those cases, I would say. And I think that, we can think about it. Maybe we need to sort of start looking at it differently. And, that's an idea that also came to me with regard to the comment about Malcolm X. It's sort of someone who didn't have the same agenda of integration, right? At the same time, Malcolm X is precisely the guy who went to Mecca and converted to Islam, because Islam was finally a universalist religion that he found there, which included people in Mecca from all over the world in all colors and shades. So there was something very universalist about Malcolm X's message, in some sense, maybe more than Martin Luther King, right? So even there, these differences are difficult to sort of, they're not absolute, and the context matters. At the end of the day, there is some unmarked category, right? That default, whiteness or whatever, and it's a grammatical category, the unmarked, gender, etc. And it's the power to define yourself as the unmarked, historically, etc., that allows you to do certain things and appear as universal, right? So today, certainly few people in Europe and the US recognize Islam as a universalist religion, but it is in a very important sense, right? And I leave it at that. I mean, I have a lot more because I was at Nancy Fraser, and I can go on and on, but I think my time is up. So 2 minutes. Okay, good. So affirmative action, for example, it's not just a Brazilian issue. It's a huge issue in the United States now, and it's being under assault already from before the triumph of Trump, with a very successful lawfare against it in the American courts. And so I think it's one of the most important struggles now in universities there, and I think it's as critical probably as here. In Mexico is a different animal, because there sort of there is some there, especially with the Morena, the recent so-called leftist government. But one thing they do is give scholarships, for example, for indigenous people to sort of help integrate them. But of course, that doesn't resolve the accumulated disadvantages with which indigenous people arrive at the university. So it's far from providing an answer for really diversifying the student body, and certainly the faculty, where I come from Israel. I would think that there's probably more Palestinian professors in Israeli universities than indigenous professors in Mexican universities, just out of personal sort of experience and people I know. But I haven't done the study. But let's say I think it's a good hypothesis if somebody wants to, go for it. And then the other thing that I sort of have a warm spot for Nancy Fraser. She's been really beaten here a lot, and I agree with the criticism, but I think this was an important moment, and her movement, what her attempt was to integrate that part into a very Marxist sort of framework. She didn't go far enough, right? But that was sort of the move there. And for me, what was at stake a lot in the writings of this period is critiquing the anti-statism of the left, right? And that's sort of her important point. And so I just want to maybe say a nice word about her, because but yeah, I think my time's up now.